Hello and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are
the FAIRtax Guys.
And Ron, I got something right out of the barrel that we need to get into.
Okay.
We got an email at our thefairtaxguys@gmail.com address not too long ago from Tracy Gatch. And he's asking, I don't know if that's a he or a she. I guess a Tracy could go either way. My apologies if I get it wrong here. But Tracy was asking, why don't we hear more about the fair tax in the national media? Why is it not more of a part of the national discussion we're having about tax reform? Why don't we hear about it on the news? A perfectly legitimate question.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are two primary answers to that. We'll dig into the first one. The first one, I think, first and foremost, is that the politicians don't want it.
Yeah.
That the Ryan plan is sucking all the oxygen out of the room because that's what the politicians want to give us. And that, as we have enumerated many times here on this program, the Ryan plan is not true tax reform.
Right. It absolutely. And we've talked about this extensively. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the Ryan plan is more of the same. In fact, look at it another way. He's catching a lot of heat because of the border adjustability tax. They're claiming that they're going to simplify the tax code. They're going to make it simple, this, that, and so forth else. But they're adding another tax. You don't simplify the tax code by adding another tax, and a tax that can be abused by Congress. So, yeah, Congress probably does not. Some people in Congress. I want to qualify myself because I know my congressman is a staunch supporter of the fair tax. And there are a number of them that are co-sponsors and strong supporters.
Yes, we do have that. But you got to realize it takes 218 votes in the House to pass something.
Yeah.
And the number of co-sponsors of the fair tax is nowhere near that.
No, unfortunately.
So we can see we do have a small group of people who are on board with this thing. But the largest majority of the Congress people, Congress critters as you call them, are not on board with this thing, and we don't hear more about it in the news because they're not talking about it. They have dismissed it. A lot of your politicians have dismissed the fair tax as some kind of crackpot idea that'll never work.
I did hear
they just don't want to deal with it.
I did hear Governor Huckabee on with Maria Bartiromo, and he brought up the fair tax. She did not follow up on it. They wanted to know about Ryan's plan. So occasionally, Mike is able to bring it out. But yeah, Bob is right. We can't get the media. And another part of it, Bob, is dollars, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because in order to get, for us to have somebody go on like Fox News or one of these news shows and talk specifically to be interviewed by one of these folks, whether it's Fox Business or whatever, it would cost us like $5,000 to $6,000.
Now that's something I never realized, that you had to pay to be a guest on one of these news shows.
Yeah,
I know the local radio thing pretty well, but I don't know what goes on there at that kind of level. So that surprised me.
And it would be nice if we could raise that kind of money. But Tracy, Bob is absolutely right. There are not yet enough people in Congress that are clamoring for the fair tax. Now, there's a lot of pushback going on. We are making a big deal of the evasion problem. The evasion is a huge problem, and Congress is just ignoring it. Not only they are ignoring the fair tax, but they're ignoring the evasion problem. They cannot ignore that for very long, because that's like the elephant in the room. That's going to be a big problem. How do you get around that? The income tax is going to be evaded. We've talked about this extensively. Mm-hmm. So if you continue with an income tax, you're continuing with the evasion problem.
Yeah, I imagine any tax is going to be evaded to some degree, but the evasion rates on a consumption tax that you pay at the cash register when you buy things is just way, way, way less than a system that requires you to, this is the income that I want you to tax me on. Have to report your own income.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And, as we said before, the Founding Fathers had it right. They did not allow an income tax in the Constitution originally. And unfortunately, 104 years ago, they felt it necessary to put it in there. Big mistake. We've been paying for it ever since. But, so how do we fix this? Well, You've got to be proactive. You've got to contact your congressman. Just the other day, I called my congressman's legislative assistant for taxation, somebody in his office up in D.C. who's familiar with the tax laws and so forth. I had an extended conversation with him. Here's what I think is happening, and I know my congressman is not a senior member of the Congress, but I want him to do everything possible to push the fair tax and to point out the problems with the Ryan plan. And I intend to further call them up and make an appointment for when my congressman is back here in our community in April. I want to go up there and talk to him. You have to do that. You have to call your congressmen, your senators. You have to write to them. You have to use PopVox. PopVox is a great way. But, there's the old saying, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And, there's a lot to that. So be part of the 20%. Please, be part of the 20%. Make noise. Contact your Congress critters and let them know you're in favor of the fair tax. And write letters to the editor. And raise $4,000 or $5,000 and get on Fox News.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, I would. We need to do that. We need to send Steve Hayes up there, and maybe we need to have a fundraising thing where we can raise enough money to get Steve Hayes on Fox News or something.
Maybe they'd let me talk to Sean Hannity. Who knows?
Yeah, talk to Sean Hannity. Yeah, something like that. Anyways,
but anyway,
somebody. So
that kind of leads into the second part of the answer to Tracy's question, why it's not really part of it, because there are a lot of people out there, and I'm fairly convinced that Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, a lot of people in the conservative media, or any kind of media for that matter, are really dismissing the fair tax as, a fringe idea that'll never pass. Oh, it's a great idea. I love it. I know. But when the fair tax book first came out, when Neil Bortz first wrote that book, he was a guest on Hannity's show. And he and Sean talked extensively about it. And Sean says, I love this. It's a great idea. But as soon as Bortz was off, he never mentioned it again.
Yeah.
And I have heard some people in Sean Hannity's position and Limbaugh's as well saying exactly that. It's a great idea, but it'll never pass, so let's don't worry about it. Yeah. And, of course, the answer to that is the same as the other. More grassroots involvement.
Yeah.
It's kind of a catch-22. It's not part of the national discussion because, the people aren't really taking it seriously. And until people take it seriously, it can't be part of the national discussion. That's what we're trying to work on here on FairTax Power Radio and our Facebook Live events as well. So we urge you to get in touch with your congressman, write letters to the editor, as he said, get on your talk shows. You don't have to be calling Limbaugh and Hannity. You can talk to your local talk shows as well. But let's get the fair tax into the national discussion on tax reform, because once that happens, game over. We win hands down.
That's right. And you've got a way to get a hold of Mr. Hannity, don't you?
Yes, I do. That leads that into Hannity conveniently has just started to feature on his Fox television show called the Hannity Hotline. And what it is, it's just an automated voicemail box where people can call up and leave him messages, and a few of them will be used on the air occasionally. But we're thinking that if we can get a lot of fair tax people to call this Hannity hotline and ask him, hey, Sean, how come you're not talking about the fair tax? I saw you talk to Neil Bortz when the book came out. I know you like this. We've got a national discussion going on tax reform. Why aren't you at least bringing the fair tax into the discussion? So if we get enough people to call this number and ask him that question, we may be able to budge him a little bit. The number is 877-225-8587. I'll give that to you again one more time. 877-225-8587. We ought to put this up on our FairTax Facebook page so folks can look at it as well.
Yep, I'll do that.
And urge people to at least get Sean Hannity and people like him involved in the national discussion and bring the fair tax into the national discussion, because we know the politicians want the other way. The Ryan plan is still an income tax. The Ryan plan will still require tax returns. The Ryan plan will still require withholding from your paychecks. The Ryan plan will still make April 15th a day to be dreaded forever. It's still an income tax. The Ryan plan keeps the IRS. It is not true tax reform, and the fair tax is.
Yeah, and the Ryan plan will not stay as it is planned very long, because we know, we looked at congress.gov today. Okay, depending on how you do the search. If you do a search on Congress.gov, if you do a search for Internal Revenue Code of 1986...
Yeah, we've discovered you got to put that in quotes to make that a string. Otherwise, you'll get back results that refer to other codes.
That's true. Bob's right.
And we fixed that, and it's close to 300.
quote, Internal Revenue Code of 1986, end quote. If you do that search string on congress.gov, you come up right now with about 290.
Yeah, 290 is what we've got that say to amend the Internal Revenue Code of this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
we were thinking it was over 2,000, not realizing that just the word code would make a lot of hits.
Yeah,
but that string, Internal Revenue Code of 1986.
We were mistaken about that.
But still, we've got, what, Congress has been in session 2 months maybe?
Yeah.
And we've got close to 300 proposed amendments to the tax code.
And that's just the
Now, of course, not all of those are going to pass. But that gives you the insight into the mindset of these politicians. They love playing with this. And I will guarantee you there's a lobbyist behind at least 280 of those 290 changes.
Yeah. So what makes anybody think that the Ryan plan, being an income tax, is going to stay the way he proposes it? You know, right now, by the way, it's just a proposal. It is not in legislative form because I understand they're going to work on health care first and dispose of that before they do the tax. But his proposal, as Bob said, is still an income tax, and we've got 290 proposals right now in the first 2 months of this Congress to change the current income tax. Why would anything change? Why? That will just continue, and the Ryan plan won't be recognizable after a few months.
Mm-hmm. So, Tracy, to answer your question, it's because the politicians don't want it. The tax code is exactly what they want us to have because they write it. And it's because there is this widespread perception out there among the politicians and other people as well. Oh, the fair tax is a great idea, but it'll just never work. Well, They said we'd never fly to the moon, and we did.
So you've got to change their minds.
Yeah, they said women would never get to vote. They do. You know, all kinds of things that the conventional wisdom of the day was, oh, that'll never happen. And then persistent people who would not give up. They have a vision and they wouldn't give up on it. They finally pushed it through, and what conventional wisdom said was impossible and would never happen did come. That can happen with a fair tax if we get enough people behind it.
Yeah, Bob's absolutely right. And it's going to take a lot of us, all of us, citizens to get after our Congress people and make sure they understand. And another way of doing it, you can, not only Congress, but the White House, whitehouse.gov/contact. Go to whitehouse.gov/contact, and there's a form there that you can fill out and send it either to the president, the vice president, the first lady, anyways, and you can talk about anything you want. So obviously you need to be civil, but and you can do it day after day. You're not limited to just once. So keep doing that.
Yeah, but rather than posting the same thing day after day, you can go to Big Solution, not Solutions, Big Solution, singular, bigsolution.org. There is a whole list of bullet points there as to why the fair tax is better than the current income tax system. And you just take one or two of those every day and tell the White House about it.
Yep. That's right. So that's a way to make your voice be heard with the current administration. All right. Contact your congressmen and your senators about the fair tax. Tell them, that you're in favor of it. A good way, if you haven't already, go on to popvox.com, popvox.com. That's an excellent way. You have to log in with your name and address because that way they'll know what congressional district you're in and who is your representative and your two senators. And when you go to H.R. 25, the fair tax bill in the House, and you put in whether you're in favor or against it and why, your comments go to your representative and your two senators. It's an excellent way to let your voice be heard. Now, in that case, you can only do it once. I mean, once you register, your consent, your approval or disapproval of a particular bill. And fair tax isn't the only thing. If you're passionate about another piece of legislation, anything that's pending in Congress. But PopVox is a good way to do it. Call your representative and senators because calls have impact.
Okay.
They really do.
We have been kind of trying to whip up public support for the fair tax, call people to action, and mobilize them to do exactly what we're talking about. Write letters to the editor, write your congressman, this, that, and the other. Call in radio talk shows. But why should they do that? Let's see if we can motivate some people to get and do that. You do that when you get excited about something, when you think something is a really good idea. And there are some really good things about the fair tax, and we can talk about its effect on the economy. We can talk about a lot of stuff like that. But let's talk. We're about halfway through the program today here, Ron. Let's talk about what the fair tax does positive for you, the individual taxpayer. And for me, right on the top of that list, there are several things, but on the top of that list, no more tax returns. As I've mentioned a while back, I have got a very simple tax return. State pension, Social Security, my announcing gig out of the college, and that's it. I take the standard deduction. I don't have a very complicated tax return at all. It took me close to 2 hours to do it because TurboTax kept asking me all these different questions that didn't apply. I said, no, none of this. I don't do that, whatever. But, the tax code is so complicated. There's so much in there that in order to do a good job of preparing your return, it has to ask you all these things.
Yeah.
So it did. And it took me close to 2 hours to do a very simple tax return. But people, I think when they understand that the fair tax gets rid of tax returns, you never have to fill out another tax return. You never have to save another receipt. You never have to sit there and spend hours on end telling the government the intimate details of your personal finances. All of that goes away with and I don't know anybody, regardless of their political ideology or party affiliation, whatnot, that really sits there and enjoys filling out a tax return.
Well, it's an invasion of your privacy, really. They want to know all kinds of... Let's say that you do, you're doing the itemized deductions, and Bob and I do a lot of volunteer work. My wife and I travel all over the upper northern part of Florida doing volunteer work. I have to log it all in, the expenses, the traveling, the mileage, and so forth. So far, the last few years, it has not come out greater than the itemized deduction, the standard deduction. But, of course, I don't know that until I calculate all that stuff. And they want to know what kind of car you have and the miles you put on it and what personal miles you put on it and all that stuff. It's crazy.
I can only imagine what businesses have to do. I've never owned a business. I don't know what they would have to do. But I would imagine their record keeping is just terrible. Of course, we do know Bob Matthews. But he says it takes hours and hours and hours and hours of time and manpower to do the federal tax return for his business. It takes him about 30 seconds to deal with the state sales tax.
Yeah. And our own little business that my wife and I had, I did the daily bookkeeping on QuickBooks. But at the end of the year, I gave the file to my accountant. He went through it, made sure that I had everything correct, and if there was something wrong, he would correct it, and he'd tell me how to correct it on my end and so forth. And then he'd file the tax forms. We had an S corp, so it came back to file. The K1 came back to us. Well, I had to pay him. First off, I had to take a lot of time to do QuickBooks throughout the year, and then I had to pay him anywhere between $500 to $1,000 to make sure I was doing everything right. To keep the fair tax, to keep the IRS off my butt. Mm-hmm. And that's for a very small, simple company that only had 2 people in it, my wife and I. Yeah. It's nuts. So, let's no more tax returns.
Think about it. If you would like to live in a world where there is no tax returns, you never have to fill out a tax return, you never have to keep records, you never have to do all this jumping through hoops that the IRS requires you to do now, and the IRS itself goes away.
Yeah.
The IRS goes away with the tax returns. So if you love doing tax returns and you love the IRS, then you can continue to support the income tax. But I would imagine that if we get enough people to actually realize, because the current system we've got, been in place for over 100 years, it's the only system that people who are working today have ever known. They figure, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so no more tax returns with a fair tax. That's reason enough for anybody, I would think, to want to get on board with a fair tax.
That's a
biggie.
Get
Get rid of the tax returns. No more. You pay it anonymously at the cash register when you buy things. Period. End of story. Game over.
Bob, over the weekend we had an event here in Ocala, and we met a lot of people in the public, and people have difficulty getting out of the income tax frame of mind. When you're explaining the fair tax to them for the first time, I try to liken it to what we have here in Florida. We have a sales tax. We don't have an income tax. But then when you're saying, it does this and it does this and you pay it this way and so forth. and they'll ask about their deductions and say you don't have any deductions because there's nothing to deduct it from. Mm-hmm. You're not taxed on your income anymore. And the wheels are turning, and it's because, like Bob said, you've lived with the fair tax your entire life.
No, you've lived with the income tax your entire life.
I'm sorry.
We want to get rid of that sucker and make the fair tax the law of the land.
Senior moment again. You've lived with the, I wish we'd lived with the fair tax. You've lived with the income tax all your life, and it's kind of ingrained in your brain, and it's really hard to think outside that box. But that's what you got to do. So Bob is right. No returns, no record keeping. I think another huge advantage, it's just darn simple.
Yeah.
I mean, the fair tax is really, really simple. Mm-hmm. No returns, no IRS, no record keeping. And when you go to the store and you buy something, the fair tax will be included in the price of the product. That's it. You're done.
Yep.
What could be simpler?
I don't know, but I'll tell you something else that I imagine anybody of any political affiliation would love would be to bring home the full gross amount of your check. No more federal withholding. No more federal payroll taxes. Now, if you live in a state that has a state income tax, they still may making that deduction. Of course, if you've got any voluntary deductions, like you want money to put in the savings account or to buy savings bonds or to, insurance, sometimes family insurance, those deductions, of course, would still take place. But with the fair tax, the federal withholding and the federal FICA and Medicare taxes, the biggest chunks out of your paycheck that account for the difference between the gross amount and the net amount, with the fair tax, that goes away. You get to keep a lot more of your own money. Who wouldn't like that?
Oh, what a great idea. And I'll tell you, for the people that are just getting by, they're just making enough to support their family, that's going to be a huge pay raise. I mean, wouldn't you like a nice, maybe 15% pay raise? How does that sound? Maybe even more, because the income tax could be 15%. And then the payroll tax is another 7.65%.
That's out of your pocket.
That's
but
out of your pocket.
Another 7 points comes out of the employer's pocket. The employee and the employer both have a piece of that payroll tax
to pay.
And
if you're self-employed, you pay the whole thing. So if you're working for somebody, you get a nice pay raise. If you're self-employed, you get a nice pay raise. Who couldn't use that to help support their family? I mean, it's your money, folks. So, that's a great pay raise.
Yeah. So if wanting to get rid of the IRS, to get rid of tax returns, to get rid of withholding is not reason enough to get excited and to motivate you to at least write a letter to the editor or call a local talk show, I don't think you can. I think that's as good as we can get, just about. Of course, there's this whole big thing of the prebate. Let's deal with that on our next program as well.
Okay.
We're just about
the prebate is extremely important.
Out of time here, but that is another thing that it does for the individual taxpayer. And we're not talking theory about how it's going to hit the economy. It's going to affect you, the individual taxpayer. No more tax returns. And, of course, with no more IRS, that means nobody will ever get audited.
Yeah. I mean, what's their audit? Have you ever heard of somebody paying a state sales tax, the consumer being audited? Anywhere, ever, at all. The consumer, has the state sales tax authority ever showed up on somebody's door saying, we need proof that you paid tax on that pair of jeans you bought last week?
No, they hit the store for that, not you.
Yeah, that's, the consumer is off the hook because the vendor is responsible for collecting that tax and sending it in.
But they wouldn't know who bought the jeans anyhow. It's anonymous.
It's anonymous, exactly. There's nothing like that. The sales tax is anonymous for you. It's so much simpler than this crazy income tax we have. So Bob is right. If this doesn't, trip your trigger and want you to motivate you to call your congressman, well, maybe there's very little. You have to do that, folks. You got to be part of that 20% that gets 80% of the work done, because that's how we're going to get this done.
Oh, yes. I'll tell you what, we got about 5 minutes left here.
Okay.
So, again, we mentioned Popbox earlier, a huge thing to do. There's some other places that you need to go as well. Look, I urge you to go to congress.gov.
Yeah.
Do that little search, Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and just see how the politicians are playing. So before we run out of time here, we said a couple of weeks ago that every episode we were going to feature one of the kinky proposals that may or may not get through, but at least it's been proposed already. You got one over there that we want to talk about before we leave the air today.
This is our crazy amendment alert. All right, Senate Bill 482, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to treat certain amounts paid for physical activity, fitness, and exercise as amounts paid for medical care. So they want to amend, first off, as you know, because of the Affordable Care Act, the income tax is now involved in your health care.
Oh, unfortunately.
The IRS is now involved in your health care. That's kind of a scary thought.
And that got me this time. They said I got too much subsidy because my wife is on that. And I had to pay back almost $1,000 on my income tax this year. You talk about, wouldn't I love to see that go away? Yes, I would.
So this treatment, I mean, this sounds nice. Yeah, have physical activity. Amounts paid for physical, like if you join a gym and you go to the gym on a regular basis, which is a good idea, especially folks that, my age, because I passed the 70 mark, and exercise is really important. So amounts paid for physical activity, fitness, exercise. Well, physical activity could be a lot. It could be bowling.
That's it. Does that mean that I get to take off what it costs me to go bowling or what it costs you to go play golf?
It could be golfing.
Can you imagine? I cannot imagine. I mean, just getting out of bed in the morning is physical activity. Walking across to go get a sandwich is physical activity, to get up during the commercial breaks while you're watching TV. So,
do we really want to get into that, where the amounts we're paying for physical activity become deductible medical expenses?
Yeah, I don't want a government bureaucrat defining the term physical activity as to what gets. And again, this is where the lobbyists are going to come in. Lobbyists for the, say, gyms and stuff like that are going to say, oh yeah, that's definitely, we can deduct gym membership, but somebody else will come in and want to deduct something else, and somebody else will come in and want to deduct something else, and there's this huge mess. And
where does it end?
We the taxpayers can't figure it all out.
And how many more pages does that add to the tax code?
Oh, more than I want to count.
As legislation. Oh, by the way, this bill had no summary. So it didn't even have an executive summary for the whole thing. It's just the title. Well, the title is pretty long. So anyways, that's our update for loony tax proposals. All right.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about your wife's webinar so she won't shoot you.
Oh yeah, the monthly webinar, the fourth Thursday of each month. This is put on by our two friends in Orlando, Mark and Larry. Very knowledgeable, very technical savvy, and it's interactive. Also, it's interactive. So you have to go to fairtax.org/webinar, fairtax.org/webinar, and you have to register for it. And then the system will send you an email with a link. And then about 5 minutes before 8 o'clock on the fourth Thursday, it'll send you a reminder. It'll send you several reminders. You click that link, and there you are. You're in the webinar. They go over an overview of the fair tax, and then they take questions. It's interactive. You can type in your questions, and there's usually some very good questions. I mean, I've been dealing with the fair tax for a long time, but my wife and I always listen to the webinar because we always learn something new. So it's interactive.
All right, and we want to direct people. I love this website, bigsolution.org.
Yeah.
Because we have got big problems in this country, and the fair tax is a big solution. It is real tax reform. It's not keeping the income tax. It's not keeping the IRS. It's not keeping tax returns. It's not keeping audits. It's not keeping withholding. All of that stuff goes away with the fair tax. So if you go to bigsolution.org, that's where you can really hook up with this movement and help us out here.
Yeah, because there's 4 buttons up at the top. There's Connect, where you can connect with the Americans for Fair Taxation. You can support. You can sign a petition. And I can't remember what the other thing is in support there, but you can support our efforts. You can contribute, which we really hope you do. Obviously, it takes money to do the national efforts that these guys are doing, sending out regular emails, sending out Fair Tax Friday email, keeping the database alive and so forth. It takes about, $12,000 or $13,000 a year.
If we could come up with enough to do a national advertising campaign, that would make the fair tax part of the national discussion.
Yeah,
and we'd really love to see that happen. But I'm afraid we're about out of time for this edition of Fair Tax Power Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The Fair Tax Guys reminding you that the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming.